welcome back to Earthbeat Visions, a history of the future sound of London. And this week we're wrapping up 2008. Starting off with the future sound of London, Electric Brainstorms 3, Frisky Radio, 26th of September 2008.
Will you wake up for 1 minute? Will you open your eyes? Open your ears!
Summer 2008 was spent eagerly awaiting a 3-hour radio mix on Australia's PBS station. Sadly, it didn't come to plan, but we heard about that last time.
The future sound of London.
Okay, let's go.
As a stopgap, however, DJ Kira, host of the Proton radio show that broadcast the first Electric Brainstorm mix in June, secured a second mix, this time for his genre show on internet station Frisky Radio. And unlike the Amorphous Androgynous kicks of the same year, this was announced a month before broadcast. In that case, you can actually let people know that something's happening. The first two tracks are 2007 pieces by German experimental group To Rococo Rot, immediately signalling that this will follow the first Electric Brainstorm show by being a DJ mix style show of other people's tracks. To Rococo Rot are cut off with some 90s sounds, followed by a track by Legiac, the Funkama side project, familiar to FSOL fans as remixes on Your Body Robotic. Next is a track by Monstrous, the jazz fusion project by former Ecstasy members Barry Andrews and Andy Partridge, tying in with the acoustic jazz-leaning FSOL digital projects like Yage, as well as a touch of Monstrous psychedelic bubble at the same time. After a run of recent tracks, the mix then moves back in time for 3 pieces recorded between 1960 and 1980. Chris Carter's Slow-Mo, a slice of early lo-fi electronica, the kind of thing homaged in Hauntology, a field recording from an early Exotica record by Arthur Lyman, an early piece of electronic tape music by Arne Nordheim. The first appearance of a Max Richter piece in an FSOL mix follows Broken Symmetries for Y from his 24 postcards in full colour album of miniatures. It ends with a recording of an episode of British TV quiz show University Challenge, with Jeremy Paxman asking De Montfort University students which music ensembles are represented by initials.
Here are your bonuses, De Montfort. Which musical outfits are sometimes known by the following initials? Firstly, LSO.
London Symphony Orchestra.
Correct. FSOL. Come on.
Light Orchestra. First Symphony of London.
No, it's the future sound of London.
Bless them. There's a touch more modern composition experimentation afterwards with Terry Riley's classic A Rainbow in Curved Air, overlaid by a piece for Waterfoam from Johnny Greenwood's Body Song soundtrack. A further postcard from Max Richter follows and leads into what was the most exciting moment in the mix on first listen, a new FSOL track. When the tracklist was provided, all the other pieces by the band were giving album titles, but Summer's Dream remained seemingly unallocated. It's announced with a superb piece of sample placing.
I would just say that, some things take a long time, and some things people wish for, and when they get the results of those wishes, they're not too happy. This is something you've been wishing for, and you're going to leave the show with a smile on your face, your ears ringing, and a lot of sweat on your brow.
A wonderful and clearly deliberate nod to fans eagerly awaiting properly new material. With its haunted atmospherics and choir samples, the track feels like a natural extension of the modern classical approach introduced on Environments 2 and promised great things for the future. I must have listened to it dozens of times that autumn and winter. It closes with the 18 Degrees to the Left environment from the 3D Headspace tour. Of possible interest and amusement, the Something You've Been Wishing For spoken sample comes from an MTV interview with Kiss ahead of their Castle Donington show in 1996. Nobody was expecting that. The second half of the mix opens with 2 then very recent tracks released on labels associated with the Hauntology movement, Front and Follow and Ghostbox, bookending a cassette boy collage about rural folks and their attitude to sex. The combination of the surreal cut-up speech with the advisory circle's creepy piano is wonderfully bizarre. The remaining 20 minutes is focused around older material, with Holland Tunnel Dive from Implog, an early experimental New York project associated with the no-wave musician James Chance, a world jazz fusion track from ECM artist Zakir Hussain, Spray by krautrock icons Can, and a 1983 track from Stephen Mallender, member of one of Brian and Gaz's favourites, Cabaret Voltaire. Also featured is Open Window, a Jazz Mags track, then listed as FSOL. The mix closes on Viewed From Above from the then recently released Environments 2. The most obvious difference between this show and the first 2 Electric Brainstorms is the amount of FSOL digital material present. Only 4 tracks here in comparison with the 14 of the first mix, which in itself made the mix feel a touch underwhelming on first listen, but in hindsight it's a fine mix in itself, with the mix of early electronics, analogue synth pieces, hauntology and jazz further developing the eerie rural sound being created through several branches of the ever so well digital output. It's a surprisingly dense mix with fairly little in the way of between track environments. A high-res MP3 bootleg of the mix, taken from the station's on-demand service, circulated among fans until the show was offered for sale with the launch of the Podroom. It's since been removed from the site, but is currently available on the FSOL Digital Mixcloud page. Tracklist as ever in the comments below. The Amorphous Androgynous, a monstrous psychedelic bubble exploding in your mind, Volume 1. Cosmic Space Music. Release date 24th November 2008. This one was a very long time in coming. Although at the time it was simply an in-house statement of intent of what the next FSOL album would sound like, the very first Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble Exploding in Your Mind radio show was earmarked for a release in 1997, but even with major label backing it was just deemed far too complicated in terms of licensing. With the emergence of the Amorphous Androgynous as a major project in the noughties, numerous more Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble mixes were broadcast to UK radio stations between 2001 and 2005. Shortly after this, those initial plans to release a mix album were finally set in motion. A label, Platypus, finally had the nerve and vision to take on the huge task of clearing and searching for these tracks with a view to releasing an MPB compilation album, Gaz told Shindig in 2010. The first thing we heard of this was mutterings on Gaz's MySpace in 2006 and 2007, generally difficult to comprehend, typically, but the general intent seemed to be fairly clear. It wasn't until the Freeze magazine interview in early 2008, however, that the first official announcement was made. The Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble project would grow into a mixed CD series on Platypus Records later in the year, with the first volume compiled by the Amorphous Androgynous and the second by the Future Sound of London the following year. More details were revealed over the course of 2008, with the double CD format and an August or September date mentioned on FSOL Digital in May, the cover listed in the Peppermint Tree booklet at the time expected in October, and eventual release announcement for the 24th of November. Copies bought directly from Platypus and FSOL Digital were shipped from the start of that month. The compilation marks a huge turning point in the fortunes of the Amorphous Androgynous. With the Isness receiving somewhat mixed press, almost all framed in an FSOL context, Alice in Ultraland being largely ignored by the wider world, and the Peppermint Tree passing wholly under the radar, the Amorphous project seemed to be teetering on the edge of obscurity. At first, the compilation release received some pretty positive views, Platypus being a successful label with a proper promo budget, but the point it went mainstream came from a very unexpected source. Oasis songwriter Noel Gallagher. The story goes he saw an advert for the album in Mojo whilst on a plane to LA, immediately loved the title and decided to check the album out. Despite his reputation for middle-of-the-road music, Gallagher has been outspoken about his love of psychedelia over the years, so there's little surprise here. Thankfully, he loved the album. Had he not, he claimed he would have nicked the title, and bought copies to give as Christmas presents to a number of his music celebrity friends, including members of Kasabian and Paul Weller. The story remains pretty constant over its various tellings, although his assertion that he never heard of Amorphous beforehand doesn't ring true at all, given that Oasis's keyboard player was Mikey Rowe, one of the most significant members of the Amorphous band from the late 90s onwards. He would have had at least some awareness of the group. Regardless, his love of the compilation is in no doubt, with him writing about it in his blog, as well as talking to numerous music magazines about the album, declaring it his album of the year and one of his all-time top 10 records. For better or worse, Gallagher was, and probably remains, a huge figure in British rock music journalism, and his influence helped spread the word of the album better than any formal promo campaign could hope to. Articles about Amorphous, interviews with Gaz, remix work and word about live shows all began to surface in early 2009. And while FSOL would frequently be mentioned in the articles, it was also in a "they also make music as FSOL," or slightly annoyingly, "they used to be FSOL" kind of frame. Bizarrely, through a compilation of other people's music, Amorphous was finally being treated like a legitimate project in itself. Among the positive reviews, Time Out called it quite simply the best compilation ever. Of the 44 tracks on the album, only a quarter had been heard on past live and radio mixes, including 2, The Mental Traveller and Helga, dating back to that very first show in 1997. Perhaps surprisingly, 18 tracks are from the 21st century, a sharp move away from the increasingly backwards-looking direction of the Monstrous Bubble series between 2003 and 2005. This may be partially due to licensing issues. The compilation itself was completed a long time before release, with the best part of 2 years spent seeking permission to release the various tracks. In the CD's liner notes, Gaz talks of frustration that came with tracking down the music's owners. For months we found ourselves in the absurd situation of having to convince various labels that they actually owned the tracks we were trying to license, so obscure were some of our finds. Some of the tracks had changed ownership so frequently over the years as part of the company's catalogues that the trail frequently went cold. For the most part, the owners were found after much searching by the band and the diligent staff at Platypus, although the liner notes state, whilst we have made every attempt to track down the copyright owners for the sound recordings used on this compilation, in some cases this has not always been possible. We will continue in our efforts to trace the owners and hold any revenues on a pro rata basis until such a time as we can locate them. Nevertheless, the difficulty in locating a large number of the track's owners necessitated a different approach, which resulted in the album's concept being, in Gaz's words, to show a lineage and reinterpretation of the word psychedelic from this present vantage point, 2007. The usual range of suspects are on the album. Acid Folk, Heaven and Earth, Pentangle, Tim Buckley, Wizards of Oz, Magic Carpet. Jazz Fusion, Obsibizar, Miles Davis, Mahavishnu Orchestra. Funk, Betty Davis, Mahagon. Orchestral Instrumentals, David Axelrod. 80s Psychedelia Revival, Nick Nicely. Krautrock, Can. Psychedelic Rock, Donovan, Tommy Graham. Space Rock, Hawkwind, The Emperor Machine. Novelty cover versions, Lord's Sitar. Contemporary Freak Folk, Espers, Devendra Banhart, Verkraum. Modern Psychedelic Rock, Yellow Moon Band, The Earlies, Mountain Machine. Psychonauts. Spoken Word, Cheetah and Neology as sampled on The Season's Turn. Blues, Henry Rowland. Neo-prog, Ian Neal, electronic space music, Bob Downs, and Indian classical music, Hari Prasad Chaurasia, and the epic 12-minute closer by Shweta Javeri, as well as 3 Amorphous tracks. Friends of the band, Cranium Pie, are present in 3 snippets of tracks that would remain unreleased for several years more. The only style not really present is the Beatlesy 60s psych pop sound present on so many of the radio mixes, the likes of the Rolling Stones and Moody Blues, Tomorrow, the Monkees and so on. The tracks are mostly cross-faded, many with brief linking environments, spoken words, What Is Love, synth sweeps, field recordings and other typically Dougans Cobain sounds, most of which have been used on radio mixes. The tracks are largely full pieces and the environment's short, largely due to the need to legally license every aspect of the album. As such, it doesn't feel quite as immersive as many of the radio mixes, but such is the nature of mix albums. The artwork features a bizarre image of Gaz's naked body morphing into a tree, designed by Diane Harris. It's suitably odd, although maybe not quite as typically psychedelic as one might expect. The usual array of questionable fonts is used, including on the track list, which at 44 tracks is pretty difficult to read. I get that they want to do everything DIY, but surely someone with some idea of typography could be involved to proofread it if nothing else. The booklet opens with a definition of the psychedelic experience by Timothy Leary, Ralph Matzner and Richard Alpert, after which Gaz provides a 5-page story about the creation of the compilation, the move from FSOL to Amorphous, his ideas of psychedelia and other philosophies, framed as a 10-year journey which he has finally reached the end of. Did this mean he was finally fully ready to engage with FSOL again? Only time would tell. The usual kind of thing, you'll probably already know whether you'll find it enlightening, tedious or somewhere in between. I fall very much in the third camp there. Among this text is a range of photographs, the not actually Amorphous band shot from 2005, studio photos, what looks like the Galaxial Pharmaceutical and 9 Ley Lines West, a stack of records, Gaz with the guitar, Gaz chatting to Donovan, photos of Brian and Gaz, and an advert for an 8-hour Monstrous Psychedelic Bubble party, 9 PM to 5 AM, August the 21st, 2001 at Major Domo's Ice Cream Parlour. One-man band of Cosmos plays universal hits. A private party, most likely, or, completely made up. Who knows, maybe it was a massive show that the band just never bothered to mention to anyone. Wouldn't surprise me. The centrefold features screenshots from The Wicker Man. A lengthy thanks page lists a huge number of names, both familiar and unfamiliar. The Amorphous live band are all named individually, as well as manager Graham, ex-A&R guy Rob Manley, Mellow Hippo co-creator Pete Fowler, Donovan, Devendra Banhart and Joe of the Yellow Moon Band and many others. The credits page also points listeners in the direction of the pod room, where further Monstrous psychedelic bubble mixes can be found. Supposedly, Mr. Gallagher was quick to purchase all 7. For FSOL digital purchasers, this was not quite the case, as the pod room didn't open until a week after copies began shipping. I really like this album. I wasn't overly excited about it on release. I was eagerly awaiting physical copies of Environments 2 and From the Archives Volume 5 during a cold and frankly lonely winter, and when a package with an EBV sticker on it arrived only containing this, I got a bit grumpy, I'll be honest. Listening to it today, I can totally understand why it grabbed the attention of so many people. Every track here is fantastic, and it works brilliantly as a musical journey. I also find it's fantastic social music. Just about everything is catchy or groovy, nothing is jarringly odd, yet there's enough subtle strangeness in the music and its variety to make it worth commenting on. I've played it many times when friends have been round, and it always goes down really well. It's my go-to Monstrous psychedelic bubble after the 1997 ISDN transmission, making it my clear favourite mix of the Amorphous era. The CD is long out of print now, Platypus having gone out of business in 2010. The licensing difficulties make the chance of a new pressing pretty much non-existent. Unsurprisingly, copies exist on YouTube and Mixcloud, and no one's going to blame you for seeking them out on there if you can't get it anywhere else. Amusing trivia from Gaz in a 2009 interview with IDJ. One of the stipulations we made is that the mixing and track selection had to be deep, immersive, but also car-friendly, so every time we attempted a mix, we went for a drive to road test it. 2008 remixes. Following the end of the short-lived Cosmic Jukebox concept in 2002, Brian and Gaz produced no more remixes for many years. The first remix of the FSOL digital era came in the form of a bonus track. Neotropic's Prestatyn EP was given a digital release on the label with a Yage remix of Home as an exclusive. This was a bit of a reset button, with remixes produced almost every year since. Neotropic Home, Yage Reconstruct. Riz Maslin, occasional contributor, live Top of the Pops vocalist, returned to the FSOL fold in 2008 with her Prestatyn EP. Having previously been released as a CD on her own Council Folk recordings 2 years previously, it was made available digitally for the first time through FSOL Digital, featuring an exclusive bonus track, a Yage remix of the closing track Home. The track also appears on the Neotropic Bandcamp issue of the album, listed more simply as Yage Remix. The EP itself finds Riz moving Neotropic further away from electronica towards a post-rock sound, something she'd begun to introduce on the 2004 album White Rabbits, but one that really reaches its peak here. The original version of Home in particular is an absolutely incredible piece, possibly my favourite Neotropic track. Really do track down this album. FSOL Digital also sold CD copies while they were in stock. Unlike the Woodlands of old, released as Yage earlier in the year, the Home remix is entirely ambient. The track uses layers of guitar from the original as subtle drones which come and go throughout, over which are placed new synth sweeps and ocean samples. It's a very minimal remix, probably more ambient than anything one would expect from either Yage or FSOL, although tonally it's most similar to Environments 2, released around the same time. Keeping in line with Virgin era FSOL remixes, it runs to nearly 9 minutes, being one of the longest tracks of the FSOL digital era. A nice soundscape, although honestly I just much prefer the more powerful feel of the original track. As with all later Yage material, the track is believed to be largely the work of Brian. Library music. The year after they first started providing music to the Extreme Music library service, 2 more Extreme Music compilations were released featuring further tracks by Brian and Gaz, this time eschewing archive pieces. Dirty Breaks, caustic electro-contaminated evil beats. Right, 3 tracks on this one. Partial Law, a brief piece for acoustic guitar, synth distortion and breakbeats. Probably considered too electronic and jarring for an appearance on an Amorphous Androgynous album, but clearly from those kind of sessions. 7 Shades is an alternate mix of Man is a Virus and Shoes. Road to Ruin is slow breakbeats and squeaking synth loops with flute and guitar samples. Once again, either a proto-Isness track or more likely a modern Amorphous piece which just didn't quite fit in with the general mood of the project. Chaos. This set features 2 brief solo tracks by Brian, interestingly. Karakatoa is breakbeats, acid synths, further distorted synth sounds. Ecstatic Interference is abstractation with chopped up sounds, reverse beats and acid synths. neither really sound like anything FSOL or Brian were producing at the time, although it's clearly a Dougans thing. Gaz wouldn't go anywhere near music like this in 2008. A couple of intriguing tracks, giving an idea of what maybe humanoid material from this era would sound like, and it's kind of sad that they both run to only around a minute. And that's your lot for 2008, another incredibly busy year for the band summed up. Do let me know your thoughts below, I'd love to hear what you think of all this, and I like replying to your comments, so do leave me a comment. There's also like, subscribe, share buttons, you know the deal by now. This really helps my channel by any kind of interaction, so press something while you're there. And I'll be back next week with the first video of 2009, a video which features no releases but a lot of transmissions and performances. Hope you'll join me then.